Kia ora, Lara here, and I am bringing to you a layout created for Stamp It Like It's Hot, and November's theme is stamped backgrounds. I'm going to play around with some photos that I took away recently when up visiting my daughter, staying at an Airbnb, and instant coffee just doesn't cut it. So I tend to take my or some form of making coffee with me wherever I go. So if I'm sort of traveling by car, I can take a little Espresso machine. But as I was sort of flying, I took my little hand presso machine, and this can use either grounds or it can use pods, and I really love the Art Espresso Roast by All Press, so that tends to be what I have for either of the two machines that I take away with me. So I've gone ahead and I've stamped on some basic white cardstock, the Latte Love little cup, and I'm just playing around with my colours here. So looking at the little hand presso, it fits on our colour wheel sort of within that balmy blue pool party kind of sort of colorway, and so I'm sort of going to bring in some other colors that are complementary with this. So first up though, I'm just backing these photos. So the stamped background where I've used where I put that cup on the white cardstock, I have just used some Memento ink because I'm going to go and color in some of these cups and add a bit of stamping in the middle, so I didn't want the ink to bleed. Now these papers are sort of very neutral, kind of could go with anything papers, and they are from the Nests of Winter 12 by 12 DSP, and I have just sort of backed the photos. I've kept the main photo with bringing in that pool party colour, however I've kept the other one sort of with that soft neutral tone. I have gone ahead and used some early Espresso cardstock, and I've put it through this Forever Plaid 3D embossing folder, and I'm now just using some more early Espresso ink to darken the edges of this, just to give it kind of that rich velvety kind of look, and it does remind me of a really good espresso coming through. So you'll notice on the background here I have gone ahead and I have coloured it. I have used the Calypso Coral, Flirty Flamingo and Pool Party blends, and now I've also used some of the Crumb Cake Stampin' Pad for sort of that little latte pattern or the latte hearts that are in there. And now I'm just sort of using first, second and third generation stamping with the early Espresso ink, and again this is using one of the splatter stamps from the Latte Love stamp set. This stamp set has also got a matching set of thin cuts, and here I'm just sort of playing around. I felt like the edge of this layout needed something more than just this white edge, and I decided to go ahead and ink up the edges of it just like I did that cardstock, the early Espresso cardstock, just to give it a bit more, I don't know, refinement, or it just needed a border or something. But I'm happy with how it came out in the end. And I decided that actually this background isn't quite finished yet. There's kind of a bit too much white. I'm not sure at this stage whether I should have just stopped here or whether it was good to keep going, but I do love the look of the paper in the background once it all comes together. So I'm just using again the blends here, and what I'm doing is I'm using the brush end or the sort of the flexi tip, and I'm just sort of flicking it through the lid that you can see. If you want to see this in normal motion, feel free to use the settings and slow it down, and you might see exactly sort of how the colour is being flicked from the lid onto the cardstock, and it just comes up with this really nice texture if you're looking at it up close, and it just adds some depth and colour around the edges there where I'm doing it. You have to sort of place the flick quite carefully. It sort of goes above almost, or sort of maybe 5 centimeters up above, so it's not right where I'm flicking, but the flicks come out above just the way I'm holding the lids to do it. So again, I'm using those same colors that I had before, so that was Calypso Coral, Flirty Flamingo and the Pool Party colors, and I did bring in a little bit of the Crumb Cake as well in that background. So what I'm using here now is the white ink refill, and I've just sort of popped that onto the glass mat, and I used it just to add some more splattering. And I'm going to use here there is no early espresso blend, so I'm using one of the other brown colours. I think it might be Pebbled Earth that I used on here, and again I'm just adding some more of that white splatter onto here as well, just to give it another little sort of layer or a bit more dimension. Just an added interest, I guess, would be the right way to term that. So just using the green Tombow here, and I'm going to start sticking it all together. This bit's always quite daunting. You've kind of got these visions in your head, and then pulling it together to pop that. It just all sort of comes together once you add the photos, and you're holding an idea in your head and then seeing it come together is quite cool. So I'm just wrinkling up the edges of those double layer sort of matting that I've got there using those papers. And I'm going to sort of keep this one that's to the right there. That's kind of my feature photo. The other one's just sort of a flat lay almost, for want of a better word, to describe all the sort of materials that I had there with me. When we got to the Airbnb, they had these ginormous mugs, and I'm not a great mug coffee. I like a nice small espresso. So I had to actually pop out to Kmart and had to get a nice cup to be able to drink comfortably. So now I'm just sort of creating some of the layers or the embellishments that I'm going to be popping on to the page. And again, I'm using the Latte Love stamp set, and I'm going to put these through the thin cut. So you'll see here that I've got both the coffee beans, and I have got the sort of top down cups. I've pre-stamped some mugs that you look sideways at that have a bit of a top to them, but here I'm just sort of going ahead and pre-colouring and bringing in those three sort of colours again. So that Pool Party teamed up with Flirty Flamingo and Calypso Coral. So just sort of keeping within that complementary kind of colourway. And I'm just colouring in the edges of the cups. Now this is the same as what I did on the background. So I'm using the light colour for in general, and then just adding a few wee details using the darker blend. And I do that with each of these colours. And once they come together, I'm going to then pop them through the little mini die cut machine, which is super handy. I had to have the big one out for using the Forever Plaid 3D embossing folder, but love being the portability of this wee machine here and being able to put these through. Now I do really like that it tells me on the little mats what I need to use to put through it, and so I'm just popping these through, and you'll see that when I get to a certain point it doesn't quite go through the machine. Now this is something that I read about in one of the groups and things, that at the moment it's going through fine, but when it doesn't go through you need to move the bit that you're die cutting back a little bit further and make sure that the plate, so there's sort of a ridge or a dip or something, is a bit trying to work out how to describe that, on the edge of those clear plates, and you've got to make sure that it folds in. So you can see there that it sort of was a wee bit stubborn to start with, but then it went through. So here I'm just cutting out the coffee beans. Now I did stamp these on the white, but I didn't actually have the early espresso blend. There's no such thing at the moment. You'll see here it's being a bit stubborn and not quite going through, but after a bit of shuffling it worked fine. Anyway, so I ended up deciding that I'd use the early espresso cardstock, and I popped that through using some beans, and I'm going to go ahead and use the Memento ink to actually stamp a bit of detail on them, which you probably can't see on the video, but you will be able to see it. Well, you can see it when you look at the layout. It just adds a nice wee detail rather than being some brown shapes just sort of sitting there and who knows what they might be. So here I'm just stamping with Memento ink on the early espresso, both the 4 beans and the single bean. Again, they are from the same Latte Love stamp and die cutting collection. So just finishing up those and getting them ready, so tucking them aside and using my stamp chamois there to clean the stamps. So the page is sort of coming together quite nicely. I'm going to do a couple of groups of 3 with the cups. And so I'm just using the Stampin' Dimensionals here to tuck these down, thinking about where it's going. So if they're overlaying, I'm not putting the dimensional on the top. So that second cup that I just popped there, I only put them on the bottom because I knew it was going over the photo and the cup. And then you can see some others being tucked in up here. I realized that I'd stuck down three of the two of the same colours. So that cup that you're looking at is sort of the greeny colour, which is the pool party, and I realised that I didn't necessarily want them both the same, but it actually came together quite nicely. So now just sticking down some of the coffee beans, using the dimensionals with the group of 4, and then I just use some of the green Tombow that's there for the single one. So it only needed a little dot and it'll adhere quite nicely. So I've sort of got these sort of 3 kind of clusters going on. You've got your 2 main ones opposite each other, and then there's sort of, with the coffee beans and stuff, some coming down that bottom right there at the moment. So I am thinking about my journaling, and I decide that I'm going to use the cup again from the Latte Love and I'm playing around with some crumb cake. Now I end up not using this, but that's okay, because it's just part of that process and seeing how stuff comes together and whether it works or not. So again, when I am stamping to put through the die cut, I often do more than one, because they just sort of tuck quite nicely in the stamp cases to be used again for other times. But in this case, it doesn't quite work out. So I'm using the Pool Party blend here to go around the edges, lighten the to start with, and then dark around the edge, and I pop my journaling in the middle of it. I end up not using this. It just doesn't look right color wise or fit as nicely as I thought it might on the layout. So I add my journaling, but I end up later on just copying that and doing it again on some white cardstock, and you'll see that happen soon. But if you look at it here, when I sort of place it onto the layout, you'll see why it just doesn't sit right. It doesn't fit. The colour's not quite onto it. Anyway, I am now pulling out a font for my title, and I'm just going to call it Espresso, and this is Classic Letters. It's a photopolymer stamp set, and they're just sort of like, it reminds me of Times New Roman if I'm wanting a font, and it's just quite a nice simple one. And I'm using the early Espresso ink here just to stamp straight onto the layout. Always a little bit scary doing this. If I muck it up, who knows what happens, but they stamp beautifully. This ink is nice and juicy, so it just layers on there for that title perfectly. And the O. So I've got all of the title stuck in there. I've got that journaling block, and I decide, nah, that's not going to work. So I'm going to grab some of the white cardstock. I'm going to do another of the stamps on there, and I am going to cut that out with the die cut machine again before I colour it in. So just using the tape there to hold it down, and then getting all the bits and pieces. This is why this machine's so handy. It's just so nice and close and easy to use, and pushing that through to give me a nice little cup journaling block. So here we go, colouring it in again with the Pool Party. Light colour around the edge, and then the darker colour just where there's some sort of little extra lines. Then I'm going to use just a black journaling pen to write my journaling. It says, coffee away from home without my morning espresso. I'm not very nice to be around, and this is my solution. So we now have that there, and I was going to pop it down here to the left, but I decide I'm actually going to stick it up where you can see a lot of the brown, the early espresso up the top there, and just overlay it on the photo a little bit. That kind of gives me a frame or a few different points of reference. So I'm adding on a couple of embellishments here. I've got the 2024 in colour shimmer gems, and also recently there was sort of a clearance sale, and I've got some adhesive backed cork rounds that I'm just placing on there too, just to finish off the page. And despite sort of having some reservations after I started colouring it and feeling it wasn't quite right, quite happy with the finished product. So get your stamps out, create some backgrounds, and check the links below for some other stamp background ideas to get your stamps out and being used. There's no point having them sitting here. Thanks heaps for watching, and I hope you have enjoyed seeing this layout come together.